Hi everyone, Carter Krishnar here for the Kingfisher on Beyond the 90. I think many of you who are watching this have probably already listened to my post-match podcast from Tampa Bay's 2-1 victory over Miami FC at Pitbull Stadium. Obviously, I was in attendance, I was at the match, and I had some strong observations about both the Tampa Bay players, obviously on the Florida Soccer Report, that's more focused on the Rowdies angle, and that was a Florida Soccer Report podcast, so I looked a little more extensively at Tampa Bay in that report, but did talk a little bit about Miami FC, and I want to elaborate on the major point I made about Miami FC in that podcast, if that some of you may have listened to and wanted more elaboration. So under Robbie Nielsen, the Tampa Bay Rowdies have a very clear way of playing, clear set way of playing. And this is the first time in a long time, and I think this was due to the absence of Pacific Nyangabiri, who was called into the Burundi national team. Obviously, it's an international window right now. That they went with a four-man back line and played with three in the midfield with Hilton, Cristosomo, and Cammy McPherson, and they went with their front three, which is the same front three that they played in all three matches. So they had to make a couple changes because they're normally playing in a 3-4-3 with wing backs, Nyangabiri and Blake Bodley, and they went to a four-man back line and played in a 4-3-3, which is not the way Nielsen's teams typically play. But if you work on the training ground on patterns of play, you can change from one formation to another. And even though Tampa Bay has played, if you go back and look through their matches last year, basically played in that 3-4-3. And you would have different guys playing up front, right? They had Cal Jennings last season, but you would see at times Charlie Dennis, before he was sold to Phoenix, playing up front. You would see Josh Perez, who of course we know from Miami FC, playing up front. But the patterns of play we saw from Tampa Bay were still very established. There was a lot of understanding between guys, even with several new players who weren't on the team last season. McPherson, Rubens, Pasillas, who scored the first goal for Tampa Bay. Even with those guys, Lawrence White, who had been with Tampa Bay several seasons ago, had gone to Phoenix, came back this offseason. Even with those guys, new players, there are patterns of play. There's an understanding between teammates. There's a use of space, even in a different formation than they normally play in. What we saw from Miami FC last night, from my vantage point, sitting and kind of knowing the opposition in Tampa Bay better than I know at this early stage of the season how Detroit and Indy were going to play. So this gave me really a better feel for Miami FC than the first two matches, because I know the opposition very well. I know the Rowdies about it as well. I know the Rowdies actually probably better than I know Miami FC at this stage. I know these players. I know this team. What I saw was a disorganized team. I saw a lot of very talented players for Miami FC. A lot of technically good players, but some serious fitness issues, which I think comes from the lack of a full preseason and a lot of guys coming in late. As we know, as we've talked about, that's something the coaches can't deal with, and that's something that the coaches couldn't help, right? That's a difficult thing for them. If guys show up 10 days before the opener, you don't get a full preseason. But it's not, the fitness is a major issue, and you see these kind of this mental fatigue set in at times in matches, which we were accustomed to from last season, although it generally followed a similar pattern every match for Miami FC last season, where 30 or 35 minutes, you have a young, energetic, kind of quick team, and you stay in matches. You sometimes create some half chances, but you don't have any quality to finish those chances. You had a lot of shots hitting posts, or the last ball, the final ball not being played in a timely enough fashion. What I'm seeing this season is a team that's disorganized, and a team where players don't have much understanding of one another's game, except on the back line. I mean, I think Mitrano was again very good last night. I had mentioned that in the Florida Soccer Report podcast. I think he was, to me, Miami's best player. I think Bolu was passable again, which is good. But that eventually, that back line, Jonathan Ricketts has been very good this season. He's been probably Miami FC's best player overall over the three matches. Dalton, if he comes back as a center back, Dalton Knutson, Mitrano and Bolu, at some point that dam is going to break because the midfield, there's no clear pattern of play in the midfield, and there seems to be very little understanding between teammates. And while this is stuff that will improve as these guys play together more and more, we have had 360 minutes of competitive football, including the Open Cup match. And there is just still things that are very frustrating that quite frankly, we didn't see last season. Miami FC had the worst team, at least in terms of point total, in the USL Championship in 10 seasons last season. And then up front, it's easy to say the two strikers are not as effective, although Bonfiglio has now scored 3 goals in a week, so that's pretty good. Missed a penalty. But they're not getting the kind of service, or they're not getting service at the right moments. So just from kind of the position of being an experienced observer, watching a lot of first NASL and USL Championship over the course of the last 15 years, or actually going back to USL Division 1, which may predate a lot of our viewers. I've been watching lower division soccer in the United States for 30 years, but really closely since about 2007. And teams that look this disorganized, even if the technical ability is good, because we see like bouts of individual talent, individual quality from Miami FC, which we didn't see last season. The team is better from a talent standpoint than last season. There's no question about that. Much better, actually significantly better, player for player, talent-wise. But if you don't have a platform and you're not structured and you're not organized, and players are not on the same page, and at times they lose their composure. And I think it's not just losing composure with the referee. I think it's losing composure with one another. Those teams aren't successful at this level. They're just not. Because the talent differences between teams in Division II American soccer is not as wide as it is in most visible leagues around the world. Okay, there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of quality of player. Last season's Miami FC team was an exception because it was a squad assembled on a tight budget with a specific purpose in mind and a specific age group, which was experimental and it didn't come off, right? We know that. But in terms of these sorts of veteran squads that are assembled, there's not that much difference in quality. It comes down to coaching. It comes down to a lot of what's going on off the field. It comes down to the professionalism of the organization. These are the things that make a difference. This is why generally in USL you're seeing the same teams that are successful most seasons. Believe it or not, Louisville, Sacramento maybe, but Louisville doesn't spend a whole lot more money than everybody else. But they're always seemingly more successful. So. And believe it or not, their scouting is better. There's more of a continuity. There's more of a platform. It's a more organized side. So my concern after 3 matches in the USL Championship, Open Cup win is great, but the 3 consecutive losses, being badly outplayed in all 3 matches, in my estimation, by Eastern Conference rivals. Remember, Miami FC had 1 point against the Eastern Conference last season. I mean, the best performances for Miami FC came against Western Conference teams. Now, 3 straight matches at home, being badly outplayed by Eastern Conference rivals, is that I don't see any structure. I don't see patterns of play. I don't see a side that's organized on the pitch. I don't see a group of players that's actually understanding one another as well as they need to. Now, this could still change. Teams have started slowly in USL Championship with new managers, with a lot of personnel changes in the last few years. And they've caught fire, and at times they've even won titles. Orange County in 2001 to me is a great example of that. But they had a fairly young core, that team. I certainly think the Phoenix team in 2023 was underachieving through most of the season, and then they got into the playoffs, and then kept going. So we're only 3 matches in. It's a 30-match regular season. We have 4 cup matches in the Jägermeister Cup. We have at least one more match in the Open Cup, hopefully more than that. So a lot can change, but I was actually much more alarmed by the performance yesterday against Tampa Bay. A team that, as I said, was missing a key player, actually missing several key players because Leo Fernandez still hurt. Forrest Lasso still injured, even though he was on the bench yesterday. This is the first time Lewis Hilton's played 90 minutes all season. Hilton, a guy who I think logged about 3,000 minutes last season. So this is this performance was more alarming to me, even though got the early goal and had a penalty and an opportunity to equalize. So just giving my thoughts about Miami FC, where they are. I know it may sound very negative, but I'm also saying that these things can change pretty quickly. But that I wanted to follow up on my Florida Soccer Report podcast because that was largely about Tampa Bay and wanted to give the flip side of that. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope to see everybody at the match against New Mexico for Miami FC next Saturday. And then we've got obviously a trip to Fort Lauderdale for the club. For me, I live in Fort Lauderdale, so a home game for me against Inter Miami too in the MLS in the U.S. Open Cup.